So I hope you all enjoyed yesterday's dinner. I think in my mind I see it in part, my selection of the wine, as a reflection of SECAN. Those of you that looked would have noticed that the wines came from Washington, Oregon, California, and that they weren't very expensive ones, but they were quite nice. I think this perhaps is how the message I think we can work on today and go forward. Now, before we really move into today's business, there are some small logistic items that I'd like to deal with. Number one is just to make sure that we take the opportunity here. I know she's hiding in the back at the moment, but Donna Stout, who's the manager for this facility, as you've probably, a number of you met her, has done wonderful things to make this work really well for us, including helping to organize last night's catering with Giuseppe Caterers. So I'd just like to give her a quick hand of applause. I saw it through the window, even if you didn't. Thank you. The second is Diane and Bruce wanted to mention where some of the goodies from the catering came from, and they'll come up momentarily to do that. And the third aspect is a number of people are asking about how the hell do I get out of here? Or I have to be at the airport at such and such a time. Is there a way I can coordinate this with others to make it efficient and effective? Diane will be sitting at the reception desk during the coffee break this morning, taking notes as to who you are and what time you have to be at the airport. We will then look at this and try to come up with a suggestion for groupings of people and helping people to make that work, which we will share with you prior to lunch. So that's the approach. So if you're interested in getting a ride to the airport, or if you have a vehicle and are prepared to share your precious space with others, please mention this so that you get on the list. Thank you. Okay, Diane? Bruce?
I'll just do it from here. And just wanted to let you guys know that the shellfish that were provided last night, the sea urchins came from Dave Rudy Catalina Offshore Processors, who is Bruce's processor, and those wonderful oysters came from Dennis at Carlsbad. And just thank you so much, Dennis, for providing, and I hope you guys all enjoyed it. I noticed that they were all gone at the end of the night, so I think we did good. Thanks, guys.
So on the agenda today, I said that this would be an appropriate time to review quickly what had happened yesterday, and I was going to spend a few minutes with my picture of this, and I've asked Jan to just say a few words as to her picture in regard to this. I think that we're broadly in agreement that it makes sense for improving our capacity to make CO2 measurements in waters along the SECAN coast. And that the main quality area we would be aiming at, in the phraseology of yesterday, was the weather quality. That is, something that was sufficient to guide and inform biological experiments and studies, not the climate quality of exactly doing year after year monitoring of small changes with time. This is not to say that if you can do it better, you shouldn't for your own reasons, but that would not be where we as a SECAN group will be focusing on trying to put in place an infrastructure that might assist that. And that discussion is for later today as to what form that might take. We also had echoed in the morning Gretchen mentioning that one take-home message from the meeting in Palo Alto was the rather simple and relatively straightforward approach pioneered by Rocheda of looking at larval densities at particular locations. There are varying ways of doing that, from settling plates to brush studies, but the feeling that there were the occasional things like this that were very straightforward, and probably people should try to include this often as well in those locations. We didn't emphasize that much in the rest of the day, but I thought we should remind people of that. And so a lot of the discussion went back and forth about varying degrees of understanding about what was necessary and where that really might go. And I hope that will develop during today's discussion. But I think I'd like to just reiterate two things that I said multiple times yesterday, but I think bear this. One is the whole piece underlying the problem of ocean acidification is how do organisms respond to the changing chemistry. The reason I'm emphasizing the chemistry here, and I think that CCAN should choose to emphasize the chemistry at first, is not because that's important of itself. It's because that's important to make sense of all the other work that's being done with organisms. And we need a much bigger capacity for doing that sufficiently well than we presently have. The second, which Jan will talk to more, is the comment I made saying that even if you are making these measurements capably for your own immediate purpose, be it a particular research project, influencing exactly your choice of water coming into your hatchery, or simply monitoring for a particular regulatory purpose, there is an added benefit to the whole community, of which I hope you would see yourself as a member, of having that as part of a network. And the part that makes it a network is that the data enter some kind of collecting system to make them more widely available. And as Jan will talk in more detail, the key feature about that is not simply that the data exist, but that you know how good they are. And thinking how we can address that part of it, knowing the quality, the uncertainty associated with any particular data, is really important. There's a lot of experience in the oceanographic community thinking about that, and some of that probably transfers directly to our discussions. Some of it may not transfer quite as directly at all. There's other experience in the analytical chemistry community, the groups that have been involved with just generally, running contract labs, providing people with data, where people pay you to do the measurement because they believe you're going to do it sufficiently well for the purpose they needed the data. And often you have to document that, yes, it is of a particular uncertainty so that they can say, yes, that's what I need. We need to think how we can do this in an efficient and effective fashion. Jan, if I could call on you to review a little.
So, yes, I really want to underscore some of the things that Andrew said and take it a little further. I think what is essential is that if CCAN is to be a network, as Andrew said, we need to have this network of data. But data really start much before some digital number gets into a database. I think we really need to be providing our community with whether they're recommendations or just visibility on a website of some best practices, and best practices for different sorts of applications. And so that's going to mean, sensors, water samples, periodicity, all of that. So I think that's something we can talk about this afternoon. We have to set some metadata standards in terms of what information people need to be providing. Andrew said data of defined quality, but how are we going to choose to define that quality? That's something that I think if CCAN does, that will be really, really valuable. Recommendations on protocols for like how to calibrate, how to do things. I'm a biological oceanographer. I know an awful lot about photosynthetic pigments. I know an awful lot about oxygen. Yesterday, I'm embarrassed to say, I learned for the first time that we have different pH scales depending on which standards are being used. I shouldn't not know that. That's embarrassing to me. Okay, so maybe that's only my deficiency, but on the other hand, maybe that's because this community isn't making those things more visible to others. So that information has to get out there. And the implications that there are conversions and that we need to be doing this. So a database, such as if we go with an IUSE type database, can provide those crosswalks, those conversions, but that needs to be part of our system, okay? So I think that the the stage is set. The 3 regional associations have made great inroads in developing data systems, data visualization systems, as well as products, but just even focusing on the data, I think there's a lot there. But in terms of designing something that really feeds CCAN, we need to be getting some better input on that. The fact that the 3 regional associations have an MOU together, the fact that they're getting one with the West Coast Governors Alliance, let's hope that that can grease some of the skids, and maybe we can work towards identifying funding sources. But as I said to Skylie yesterday, you know, when we think about the resources, it's buying people's time. We need to be able to get directed funds so that the appropriate people with the skills and know-how can do what CCAN's desiring. And it's really critical, I think, that we start to be identifying how can we make progress on some of these things like best practices, like QA procedures, like metadata, that sort of thing. Then, as Andrew said, I think there are, well, he didn't quite say this, but I think that there are 2 goals here. One is to define the physical chemical environment. The other is to define the impacts on biology. And when we had our global meeting, we actually set those as 2 different goals and then worked to fill those. And I think that the latter of those goals is much more challenging, and what kind of data delivery system will be required to address that is much more of a challenge. I don't think that the regional associations are in a point, especially for things like experimental data, where we can, you know, turnkey and fill a lot of your needs. So that's something that would require some directed efforts as well. Maybe there are systems we can leverage. Maybe we can do a lot adapting the systems we have now, but that's something I don't want to sweep under the rug and say, oh yeah, the IUSE system, we've got your data system handled, because the biological database is going to definitely be a different beast and one that requires some input. So I guess that would be my perspective of our afternoon talk on the data. And I just want to say that, you know, at the global level, at the national level, at our regional level, and even because Washington State has this blue ribbon panel on ocean acidification, it just feels like there are so many efforts that are going on right now, and I think it's a golden opportunity for the CCAN community to continue our leadership pushing this and to make some progress on getting forward on some of those things that I said we need if we're going to have data, a database, a data delivery system that fills the need of the CCAN community. I know we can't do that without, you know, any funds. How to be, you know, the leanest and meanest. I mean, I'm gaining weight, so I don't have any any suggestions there. That was a joke. So anyways, but I mean that it's not a trivial thing trying to figure out how to get funds for something new. But if the stage isn't set for the importance of this issue and the leadership of the CCAN community right now, I think we couldn't ask for some better setting conditions. So that's my challenge, and that's my summary. Thanks.
I want to emphasize something you just raised there, and I think that we do have a chance through the Blue Ribbon panel process to highlight the role of CCAN in setting, at a minimum, some standards for the kind of observing system that meets some of the needs that we're concerned about. And if we can't get something into the report that says we really want to integrate with this network, we want to see it funded and supported going forward, I'd be surprised. I think it's just a natural fit. You know, if you squint right, when you're looking at Andrew, you can see that tall wizard cap, which in the world of carbonate chemistry, everyone sees very clearly. And there are not many of those around. And Andrew's prescriptions for how to do this are really closely listened to. And I think that's going to be the case for a while.
Thank you. We'll take you up on that and consider it done. But I have a question for you, Jan. Is the MOU comes together, there's a couple of MOUs, one to bring the 3 RAs together and then one to, support the West Coast governors. Is there an opportunity, will there be a website that demonstrates how the 3 RAs are working together? And is there an opportunity also to link and empower and reference CCAN there, so as a body that sets these guiding principles so that we can be reflected from the observing community?
Good question, and the honest answer, Emilio, is that there is even a prototype website linking the 3 regional associations, but it's very much a pilot and one that Emilio put together with a little bit of input from others. And so the answer to your question is yes, absolutely. The West Coast regional associations would like that. We would definitely like to highlight CCAN as one of our examples of West Coast regional collaboration, and so we can move forward with that. So I don't want to speak irrationally for Emilio and say, oh yeah, he'll get to work on that, because obviously those things take a lot of time. So we may need some way to figure out how to cover that, but that's definitely within our vision. And Emilio, if you want to add anything? Hang on.
To clarify on the websites, the OA Asset Inventory webpage that we showed yesterday, that's something I did put together based on the input from all the RAs. We've also been working, the 3 RAs have been working on a website to represent our collaboration, a simple website that talks about what the MOU represents, what it is we intend to do, and some examples of what that collaboration is. This has been largely thanks to CENCUS and people in CENCUS, but we haven't managed to find the time to define that initial website. We're writing a paper right now for a conference at the Oceans MTS conference in Virginia in October, I think, that is going to talk about this collaboration between 3 RAs. And one of our goals to take advantage of that opportunity to write a paper is to unveil this simple website. And I have suggested actually that we could include this CCAN OA asset inventory as part of that website. So baby steps that are concrete.
So one quick note to all of us here. In about an hour, we're going to have a coffee break. And Skyly, Steve Weisberg, and I would like you to get really caffeinated, because we're going to start having a discussion that connects to directly what you're all mentioning, is that it's time to do it, people. We're going to come up with some recommendations that this group can agree upon. And I'm voting for 3, because 3 is a nice number. I think we can come up with that. And we'll talk about that more, but drink coffee. Get ready. Dr. Dixon?
So this piece of the agenda I put aside in my own prejudice and feeling that probably the thing that was most limiting us in our ability to make these things happen was that there wasn't adequate infrastructure around that we could draw on to do this. So what do I mean by infrastructure? Well, at the moment, there's a lot of people who say, well, we realize we need CO2 measurements, but we're not sure how we should make them. Or we've started making them and we really rather wish that we hadn't gotten into this. What can we do in the way of infrastructure that would make that more straightforward for people to make those measurements of known uncertainty? And I think that that's probably a key feature that we as CCAN say this needs to be done at not just the broad statement, but more specific items of what needs to be done, and that CCAN is going to play a significant role in ensuring that it gets the funding and the enthusiasm of the community to get it done. So at that level, I think we have to say, okay, if we're going to put that amount of effort in, and in a useful conversation I had with a member of the audience yesterday, they pointed out that probably, although being lean or mean or smart was good, actually the effort involved in producing funding to get something done also paid off substantially. And I think in that regard, we have something to work from, which is the community of people here in this room and the others that are like them that they know about along this coast here. But we haven't clearly said, okay, how would we move out from where we are today to get this done? And I think my suggestion is that seeking an investment in the training, the capacity building, the setting up the potential infrastructure for handling data at the level that we heard yesterday. What are we even going to call parameters? This begins with very baby steps, is probably important. And I'd like to get people in the room to share their own thoughts about this, their own insights, that we can try to understand whether, as a group, people are behind this idea or whether they were hoping for something with more glamour.
Yeah, Andrew, I fully agree with, I think what you're advocating is we all have a lack of resources that we can devote to quality assurance, quality control, data management, bringing together the existing data that are being collected and improving their quality and calibrating them and so on. On the other hand, I have to say, and maybe I'm biased because I'm one of the guys who does collect data, I think it would be useful, since we have all these people together here, to also think a little bit more about where we would like to collect information, observations. And I think you started that with one of your slides yesterday, where you were, I think, asking for some assessment of important or critical locations where we would like to have sustained observations. And if this group could come up, I think, with two sets of recommendations. One about infrastructure that actually collects observations, and a second set of recommendations about quality control, quality assurance, and data management, I think then we would be more sure to cover both bases, because there's no point investing a lot in data management if you don't have the resources out there that collect the data routinely that you would want to collect, and also the other way around. So I would be in favor of pursuing both of these recommendations.
I think it would be a great idea to have some short courses maybe during the summer, perhaps in a room like this one, and in a lab like yours, Andrew, where people who are interested in making measurements could bring their own sensors and could test them out in the same room at the same time together, and learn about how to best record the data, learn about how to best get quality control estimates, and do this in a coordinated fashion, maybe once or twice a year. Or maybe not in this room or your lab, but somewhere central.
So I just wanted to jump in and say that that's an idea that's been out there for a long time, and George and Brad and Alan and Andrew and I and Dick recently submitted a proposal with that concept in there, and we actually were going to, once again rely on the hatchery infrastructure, because you've got real ocean flowing seawater there, you've got instruments in place that are working, you've got biological processes going on that are being controlled and are ocean acidification relevant. And so that's an idea that's out there, and we've got frameworks put together, and we can discuss that with the greater group if people are interested.
So, Burke, on that note, Terry Klinger from the University of Washington had to leave to run another workshop, of course, but she chimed in and said that she would be very supportive of such an activity, and if the Friday Harbor Labs could be of any assistance in terms of hosting such a workshop, she'd be happy to contribute, mostly because they have such great, they might not have all the infrastructure you want for the science, but they have great housing and a lovely location for a retreat-like setting. So she said she'd be happy to participate in this.
I guess I just want to close the loop on that whole idea. I think that's necessary, and some of this instrumentation's pretty easy to bring down for a workshop or whatever. Some of it is not, and so I think that any sort of direction that CCAN gives, I mean, this is impossible. The level of precision we're asking for is impossible right now, and so if CCAN is going to ask for that level of precision, we need to have the suitable reference materials in order to collect that data. And also, yes, we can come to a location and work on calibrating instruments properly, but we are also, it's going to be necessary to maintain that level of precision, to have somebody, one of the 4 or 5 skilled technicians in the world that know how to do this properly, to come to these facilities once a month, once every 2 months, whatever it might be. But that is, if we're going to get to this level, we have to do it. It has to be part of it. That's my opinion. So.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I had a conversation last night with someone, but Jan's comment reminded me of this. Who knew there were 2 different scales? And until you were down in the dirt, in the trenches, talking to Richard Feely and Andrew Dixon about seawater chemistry, and you're actually doing it, some of these things aren't revealed. So I've seen Andrew's tables of the matrix of doom, where here's what you want to measure, here's the equipment we have, here's the status of this process. And Skyley said, oh my gosh, I didn't know that. And just to clarify, there are 4? Okay, sorry. There you go. So this could be something that would be beautifully captured in our recommendations, Alan, so that we would say, there's the ideal, and there's where we are right now. And I think there are very few people, possibly in the world, who appreciate that as much as the fishers, the growers, and the scientists in this room. So if we can capture that, that would be really important, I think.
So I have a comment that may be, I don't know if it's too far down in the weeds or not, and I spoke about this a little bit with Andrew last night at dinner, but there is existing, I'm sure there's plenty of existing infrastructure we might be able to tap into to do weather-style data of ocean acidification measurements. And one that I think of and that I'm somewhat familiar with is pretty coast-wide number of folks that are sampling for harmful algal blooms on a regular basis. Pretty extensive in Puget Sound, all down the Washington coast, Oregon, and into California. And just the idea that we could provide them with the training they might need to collect those samples, and then some funding to ship those samples to a common lab, and then some funding to provide that lab the opportunity to run those samples, and pretty quickly and fairly easily set up by piggybacking on an existing infrastructure. At least it'd be surf zone samples. These wouldn't be offshore samples. These are, for the most part, people that are collecting either right in the surf or off piers or in harbors or off docks in Puget Sound. Some of those people are volunteers, some of them are paid staff. Just an idea of thinking about existing infrastructure that we might use to collect at least some baseline data to watch what's going on. So.
Another example that I alluded to in my talking yesterday afternoon is that many people affiliated with the regional associations have shore stations where they're setting up regular monitoring for a variety of marine parameters. Asking how you could advise setting that up to also measure things relevant to this problem in a way that makes it manageable, not needing a whole new person at every location to make it work, is probably going to be a key in going forward. Because the hard part in this thus far, I think, is that people are learning that this is sufficiently complicated. They have to have somebody that knows what they're doing. On the other hand, they can't really justify having a full-time person that deals with that in an environment where their major obligation are to other projects and needs. And how do we square that circle is really, I think, one of the things that I was asking is, are there ways that we could provide information as infrastructure? Training courses are good. The need for reference materials is good. The suggestion that a central lab that could analyze samples. There's a variety of ways one could use such a lab, not just for samples that were collected conveniently from other programs, but also to weld this program together. So these are the kinds of thoughts that I'm just wanting to hear us talking about, because we're going to take it a little later today and say, okay, how do we spend the first amount of money that we're able to solicit for this? What's the most important thing to do? But at the moment, I'm delighted at the way that people are just coming up with thoughts and ideas about what they see as important, from asking, okay, we still don't have enough information about where people ought to be making measurements, and that's, I'm sure, true. We had this discussion somewhat pointing out that the current feeling is that there probably should be measurements where we have already got biological time series, and that's probably not been adequately identified. So there's a variety of things, and I welcome people's contributions now, because this is somewhat of a open mic discussion on this before we start to narrow it down and say, okay, of all the good and great ideas we've heard, how do we take a subset? Ian?
To kind of going back on the earlier comment, I think some of these decisions might need to be made after we come up with what we conclude is going to be adequate in terms of the temporal span in between samples, or whether it needs to be continuous. Because per the earlier comment, we have a lot of sampling that's being done along both in the estuarine and on the coastal shorelines through the Mussel Watch program, through projects like ORHAB. So you have people that are skilled and that are interested. And when I look at the cost, the matrix that you put up of the equipment and the sampling costs for some of these different levels of sampling, and going back to Alan's comment, that's going to be impossible to fund and make practical. So if we were to utilize these people that are out there doing the Mussel Watch or doing the plankton samples, if we can come up with a QC and QA method that we agree upon, where those people have been trained adequately, and then getting them into labs such as yours and at the University of Washington and at NOAA and elsewhere that can process those, and we set up a schedule for those, maybe the idea of trying to come up with all of this funding for the equipment and the upkeep and the training of these shore monitoring stations can be applied for the shipping and the sampling and the testing at the shoreside labs that has the adequate QA and QC.
So I think you raise a really good point, and I think what we have to remember is that there's no one size fits all here. If it were up to the card carrying carbonate geeks in the room, we could sit down and come up with a plan that would work and would do what we needed it to do. But we're not talking about that small community. And I think, Jan was asking me last night, what does she do when the Lummi tribe calls her up and says, how do we make this measurement? And she wanted the answer. I don't think there is the answer. I think the answer to the Lummi tribe might be $4,000 worth of balance and a decent electrode and some pH standards that would get you the kinds of results that Andrew talked about on discrete samples, right? And every single one of these is going to have a different set of criteria. Do we want autonomous in-water continuous measurements? Do we want discrete samples? And it might be as simple as collecting samples the right way and shipping them to a lab. It might be as complicated as building a combined TCO2, PCO2 system like we have at Whiskey Creek. And what I think we need to do is develop, contactable experts and a decision tree or a flow chart where, you call up and you say, hey, we've got this sampling program and we'd like to get this information. What do you recommend we do? And we walk through how frequently you sample and what the environmental conditions are like. And we say, we think you should buy a balance and a pH electrode. And be done with it. Or we think you should collect samples this way and send them to Andrew for him to analyze for you. And I just don't think we can say there's one answer. I think it's different for every user, for every environment.
I would really agree with what Burke is saying, and I would even take it farther, that if we could make some recommendations. So he's saying one size doesn't fit all, and I agree. So how many sizes maybe are there? Are there, small, medium, large, extra large maybe? 3 or 4. And if we could define within those bins what some of the costs, what some of the requirements. So if you're going to do this, you'll have this level of accuracy or precision. You could apply the data for this way, and it's going to require you to do this, thus, and thus. And then the second one is another bin of all of those items. If we could define some of those things or give some input on that, then entity X, Y, or Z can say I really want to do this, but I can really afford to do this, and these are things I can or can't do. But right now, there's just that, everything's so wide open. And so if we could define some of those I'm calling them sizes, just on the one size doesn't fit all, but some of those bins of recommended practices, equipment, applications, I think that would really be a help. So it's going to be volunteers, buoys, etc.
If we're defining sizes or whatever we're calling them, I think we need to define those for assuming that everyone's in a highly dynamic estuarine environment, right? Because there, as I've tried to say before, there's real variability that's going to add to the error in a place like Netarts Bay. So if we're defining a standard, if you do this, you're going to get this level of quality. Well, we have to start at the point that you already have this real variability in your bay that's going to give you a level of uncertainty, and then set our standard for what the gold tier or whatever it is, because there's a lot of real stuff that you're not ever going to be able to, it doesn't agree with what the expected values are in estuarine systems. So I think we have to take that into account if we're defining levels of accuracy.
So from the standpoint of each of us having a particular reason for wanting to make carbonate system measurements for our own projects, I think that there's no one size that's going to fit all, for sure. But from a standpoint of being a network where maybe we're more than just a call center for help and a sizing chart, but we're a network with integrated data so that we can start to see not necessarily evenly sampled large-scale patterns up and down the coast, but that we can start to understand a little bit about the variation in dynamics. I think maybe we ought to think about having some at least placement of the same types of data with the same types of instruments being collected at a range of places that could be really more seamlessly integrated along larger spatial scales with continuous monitoring along with discrete sampling to verify those continuous monitors. And so, I think we have to be more than just a help center.
I think you've really done a nice job at suggesting what we need to do to go forward, and I believe the same way. I think everything we said here this morning is very doable, and that there's no reason why the report can't have a very nice table to lay out the options of how to make measurements and what their costs are going to be, and that's what Jan was saying. There's no reason why we can't take the existing network as we have laid it out and suggest what the network should be. I think we're very close. Jan has a lot of that. What is needed is the commitments. What is needed is for people to say, yeah, I'm on board or not. And that goes all the way from the hatcheries to the moorings and everything in between, the coastal networks. So the little pieces that make the big total puzzle for Washington, Oregon, California, there has to be a commitment for that. And we have to define what that is, and we have to make sure people are on board with that. Not that we think they're on board, but they've committed to being on board, so that we know what we're talking about in terms of what our network is. And I think that's one critical step we have not done yet that we have to do. And so we know who is going to be integrated into the database system. We know what their data products are going to be, and we know exactly how we're moving forward. Now we're becoming a network and we're becoming an entity. Then as we move that forward and people have made that commitment, then we can start making the decisions of what's the best way to look at that spreadsheet of available measurements, and people can start saying, well, since I've made this commitment, this is the way I think I should do it. And you can provide people to give advice on what the alternatives are for that. There are alternatives that we should be looking at, because it may not be obvious to everybody what's the best alternative. There are limitations to what the major laboratories can do. For one thing, they can't do measurements in a very timely manner. They go into the queue and they come out 6 months later or 2 months later. So if you've got an experiment that you have to have data sets right away for, you can't wait for 6 months, then that major laboratories aren't going to do you much good. So it depends a lot what the nature of the experiment is, what your outcome needs to be as to what decisions you will make. I think we can advise folks on how that might come about, because we have a lot of expertise to advise folks. But it all depends on what your nature of your experiment is itself and what you're trying to accomplish. So there has to be, what I'm suggesting there has to be, along with this commitment to being part of network, a technical advisory committee that is available to give that kind of advice on how to move forward. And from that technical advisory committee comes the training and education that we are certainly prepared and capable of doing. We have the facilities, we have the people, we can do that. It will take resources, it's not free, but we can do that. But again, if you set up a technical advisory committee that can provide the resources to do that. So there's a few steps that we need to make commitments to. What is the network? Who is the network? What is the technical advice we're going to provide in that network, and how we can proceed? Like I was saying yesterday, every data point should have a quality control component associated with it. Should say what scale they're using, and have that identified in such a way so then when the data is received by the data management centers, they automatically know what to do with that data. They know whether it's included or not included, given what level of precision is required. They know what the scales are, because all that is provided. There's much that goes with the commitment to be part of a network that we need to really seriously take charge on. And that's one of the things I think is very important to understand how we would move forward.
I want to build from Dick's point, and as I sit here, I think the difficulty I have of tracking the conversation that we're having is that, on the one hand, we've been thinking about the aspirational CCAN, the what if, what should it look like, what if we had lots of resources, and the other is a very concrete CCAN, which, and I look around the room and I bet that there's about, I'm going to guess about 24, 30 moorings or sensors that are continuously measuring carbon chemistry along the California Trench that we represent right now. So should the effort be talking about, let's have all of us commit those 24 or 30 nodes and say, we're part of the CCAN network. And then the effort is really about how do we improve the exchange of data from these existing sensors? How do we improve our ability to quantify the quality of the data that's coming from each of these sensors? And that is the core, committed, concrete CCAN. And then we will build, we'll look forward and think about what an aspirational CCAN will be, but we've got assets right now, and how do we make that real and functional so that we can light it up tomorrow?
So I guess two things I wanted to say. One was Andrew put up this 0.2 saturation state sort of precision as a viable potential uncertainty. So I didn't hear anyone else say whether or not that was useful, and in my opinion, I think it is. So I'll stick my neck out and I say, for most biological applications that I think about, that seems like a reasonable level of uncertainty that's useful for us to have. And maybe there's other people that disagree, but I think it's important that we.
Well, one thing I want to say about that is that both you and Burke have stressed that highly, but you haven't told us why yet. And I want to hear why you think that is acceptable or not. What is the biological parameterizations that fit within those parameters? I'm still waiting to hear that.
So the experiments that I've seen and the experiments that I've run, the responses within a 0.2 unit change in saturation state don't seem to be measurable, at least in the way that we're doing experiments now in terms of the biological responses. So I would say that in that 0.2 unit change in aragonite saturation, we don't see a whole lot of difference in organism responses in what I've done. Now, there's other people in the room.
Is that just one species that you're talking about, or is that a suite of species?
Well, I think that should be a consensus from the group.
I don't think. What I'm getting at is I don't think we've vetted that in a scientific way yet.
Right.
And I think that is one thing not to be done here, but it has to be done. We need it. You give a presentation at a meeting in which we can all think about what you've learned. That has yet to be done. I don't know that there's any information for me to agree or disagree with you. I just haven't seen it presented.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I guess I'm just putting that out there so that there's maybe some other biologists who want to chime in about whether or not that's viable from their experience. But before, the second thing I wanted to say in terms of the training side of stuff, I'm going to check with our co-PIs on the USDA proposal and make sure their intellectual contributions are accounted for, but I want to know whether that would be something useful for the whole group to see as a one plan that we had put together for moving forward for training and implementation of a network, beyond what Francis said about the things that are there already, but part of that was actually to include sustaining that network after we couldn't afford to keep the high precision instruments in place. And so it was training the people on the ground to do the measurements and the calibrations and all that properly. So if that's something that would be useful, I think I'd be happy to share that. I have to check with the other co-PIs, and I just ask that the intellectual contributions that we've all made to that are just respected in that. But I think as a group, it might provide a starting point to think about some of these things too.
So I just wanted to jump in on the point too as well. Since it's me and George, I'll back him up here. I can think of no experimental studies that have manipulated omega, regardless of the means they used to manipulate it, over less than a 2-unit change. And 0.2 is a signal to noise of 10 to 1 over that kind of change. I think resolving that signal at that level is useful to the field, and to suggest that we're not hoping that we can do better, or that we don't think we already can do better. I don't think that's the point. I think that if someone were to present data where they manipulated omega over a 2-unit range with plus or minus 0.2 resolution within that range, that would be useful data to this community. And I also think it's achievable by labs that aren't you or Andrew. And so that's the motivation for it. I think we've got a lot to learn, like you said at the beginning of the meeting, about whether or not that's fine enough to really resolve the mechanisms, and we should always try to do better. But that's the justification for it.
So yesterday I was a little confused by what the 0.2 uncertainty meant, and I went to Andrew during the afternoon break, basically with Alan's comment about, well, 0.2 doesn't really matter if we're above 1.6 or under 1.4, but if it's between 1.4 and 1.6, it might matter a lot for understanding how our oyster embryos, larvae are doing. And Andrew gave me an answer that I can't fully remember. It was very eloquent. And it had to do with what that 0.2 uncertainty meant. And I told Andrew that I wouldn't remember his answer today. So if he could remember his answer and tell us about it, because it was very educational for me.
In essence, when I talk about 0.2 uncertainty, I mean that if two different labs made the measurement at two different times on what was really the same water, they would agree with that degree of agreement, and that it would be within the correct answer within that degree of agreement. Of course, in your own laboratory, you're almost certain to get measurements meaningfully more precise than this. And thus, if you can see a change on the organisms you're studying where that matters, you may also have the information you need. But the real distinction, I think, is that we want data from different groups at different times to be comparable within a known uncertainty. That number was, to a certain extent, as Dick alludes, picked out of a hat. But I don't think, and I think I share Burke's comment on this, that it's unachievable or too lax. Probably we don't know enough about the quality. As I look at the varying ocean acidification measurements that I've seen, many probably barely have that degree of uncertainty, really, if you looked at it. Others have taken the rather sad approach, which is, I know I don't need to know it as good as you would, speaking to me, and I know I don't have it as good as you would, so I must have it as good as I need, which also lacks a little bit in the discussion. So what we were trying there is really to put a concrete number on it. And I think that the benefit of a concrete number is that you can work from it. The disadvantage, of course, is it's something to disagree about. So my defense for this is that I think it's achievable. I'm hearing from some people that it's obviously not meaningful, and perhaps more negatives there than you might wish. But I think the real key here is it's achievable by choosing a number. We have a target. If we don't choose a number, we won't have a target. Did you, Dick, have an alternate number that you had in mind?
That was not the point I was trying to make. The point I was trying to make is that I don't think we know either yet.
I'd agree.
Since we don't know either very well yet, because certainly George knows a little bit more than the rest of us, and so does Burke, I think we need to realize that that's something that we have to work on as a group, and therefore work towards defining that more clearly, both from the understanding of what this community can do in terms of developing a measurable uncertainty that we can document. That's one goal. And the second goal then is to define what the level of uncertainty that we can actually see changes in the biological systems, but knowing that biological systems function quite a bit differently from organism to organisms, that we have to recognize that what we learn from one organism does not necessarily apply to another organism. That's why I was questioning you back. And, as you know, and as you've done such great work on, mechanisms are very important to establishing what this criteria is, and we're just getting started with that. So these are research topics. These are critical research topics. So this body has to accept this responsibility to take these research topics on, and that's what I'm trying to drive home here. And then this body has the responsibility to start pushing our federal agencies and our state and local agencies to assume that responsibility and find those resources to make that happen. So that's another thing that we have to agree on. And that's why I'm pushing so hard for this, because we have to agree on it as long so we can unilaterally get support from agencies that do have the resources to help us out with this. So these are priorities for us.
So Richard, on that note, since George and I are kind of in the research trenches along with other people, if this body is responsible, and I'm just really curious about your vision, if we're responsible for pushing the research agenda as this group, what's the mechanism by which you can see that happening? Do George and I write NSF proposals? Do we form larger collaborative groups that span CCAN? Because I'm retiring in about 5 or 6 years and starting a goat farm in Oregon, so I don't have a lot of time. Although I'll be
your first
yeah. Okay, awesome. I've got my hired hand for my goat farm. Okay, so and I'm really serious. We need strategies about how because there are people in this room with a lot of entrepreneurial mojo, and it would be really nice to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I guess I'm beginning to realize that you have to approach this at many different levels. You can't just approach at one level. No single federal agency, I can guarantee you, no single federal agency will address all of this. The sum total of all the resources we have for the NOAA Ocean Acidification Program could fit well into paying for CCAN and not even that. Not even that at all. And so we have to recognize that. So what do we do about that? Well, actually, I think the way we do this is we do the kinds of things that we are starting out with in Washington. That is, in the Washington State, we developed the Blue Ribbon Panel that was not afraid to put dollar amounts on what it costs to do these things and to lay that out in very clear, succinct reasons why we need to do it. And that's a heck of a lot of work. I can guarantee you we're all exhausted from just getting this done. But in fact, that's what has to be done because that's the ammunition that we need at the state levels. And I firmly believe that right now we're going to be moving forward more at the state levels in the next several years than we are in the federal levels. And we have to accept that political reality. We can move the federal levels if the states help push that along. That's the perspective I have. So those of us who are involved with NOAA and NSF, we can make progress on that, and we do make progress on that. Every year there's something new that helps us along. But that's not enough. We got to push it from the state levels. And as we push it from the state levels, they bring a lot more pressure at the federal level. That's the way it really does work. So you've got to get the states to say, this is what we expect from the federal governments and the federal agencies. And they will respond because they have to at that point in time. So that's how we do that. That means a lot of effort, but that means that there's coordination at the CCAN level to show how that coordination between Washington would work with that coordination with California. And you actually do the handshaking in the introductions because we know the people and they do not. So when I'm on a part of a Washington State shellfish initiative, I have to do the introductions with the people from California because my colleagues in the state government don't know these people. So you do that extra effort to do that. And then you show them what CCAN has provided and what they can provide if we give very clear directions of where we're headed. And then they can see how the pieces fit together. They don't see that right now at all. None of the 3 states see that right now. That's our responsibility to show the way of how that will work. If we are successful at that, then we have a great chance to lead the country because this is our problem, and I can't stress that enough. We have the problem here. We have the economic issues that are at cost here, and I think we have to lead the way with CCAN, and I think this is the responsibility we need to assume, and I hope that we do.
Dick, when we're talking about long-term funding, coming down from the feds to the states or the states to the different agencies or research groups or universities trying to get this data, one of my concerns is, we got this funding originally as a shellfish group with a concern, and it's grown and grown. But one of my concerns is it may get to a point a few years down the road, especially if the shellfish industry kind of just continues to stutter along or may falter. It may get to a point where somebody in DC or elsewhere just says, well, that's nice. I've got that little shellfish industry out there on the West Coast, but, why else should we be worried about this? You've got these shellfish guys. What's the economic impact of that going to be if those guys go away? And I guess what I'm concerned about is that we're sitting here trying to prioritize how we're going to get this done and the quality of the data. I'm concerned that we may not be able to get the funding if we don't have the good story going with it, and which is coming from the biological side and from all the universities up and down the West Coast to say, hey, it's not just shellfish. And I'm concerned that when we go back to DC and we're knocking on the door saying, hey, we need continued funding for this project, that they're going to say, well, what else beyond the shellfish? And from a university standpoint, if we can get the biologists more involved with either ongoing research or other thoughts about research or other presumptions of what's going to happen with the continued reduction of the saturation state in coastal waters, if we can't sell the bigger story, I'm concerned eventually the funding could go away because people just, they may give up caring about it because they've just heard about these shellfish guys whining for a number of years.
So one thing, I'm not volunteering for this, Ian. However, NSF has really taken to heart exactly what you're saying. And I'm going to speak personally now as a person who's funded by them for quite some time now. And, they've really always been, to be very simple about it, they're more, interested in pure science or mechanistic stuff. And about 5 or 6 years ago, I went to a program manager there and said, gee, I'd really like to work on oysters or mussels or something because this is an issue with the West Coast shellfish aquaculture situation. And they were very clear in their response to me. They said, oh, no, we don't do applied work. That's not our job. And so I never tried. Well, they've opened up a new program, I mentioned this yesterday, with sustainability science and what the NSF-funded science, the federal dollar, can do to have some of the science that we're funding contribute to solutions. What can we do? And so the door is actually wide open. And I made a phone call the other day. I haven't got an answer back yet, but the door is wide open for a group like this to come forward with not just to write a proposal to NSF that has a very strong representation from our fishers and aquaculturists, and also that has a very strong path for outreach to policymakers and to communities. And, it's just one baby step forward, but 5 years ago, we never had a place to go with something like that. So I'm looking into that deadline. I think it's next year sometime. And Brad, you've mentioned a lot of things that we could actually, discussions we can contribute to, and those kinds of proposals, they have this scary name like Research Coordination Network, RCNs, and nobody knows what on earth that means. But basically, they won't fund research, they'll fund activities. And they'll fund us doing a lot of this kind of partnership building and community building that really, frankly, takes a lot of time and money, and there's an opportunity for us out there.
I want to speak on the side of the states. I really agree with you about the fact that we need to get the states going, pushing for some of this effort. And being with the California Department of Fish and Game, we are beginning to delve into the things that we need to do in regards to climate change and ocean acidification. One of the things that I want to take the step saying that I think that we can take the message that it's more than just going beyond shellfish. Shellfish is important, but that ocean acidification can impact our entire ecosystems in some manner or another, and that these are things that we really need to get a better handle on. That means research, that means going out and making it more noticeable to our policymakers that it's important and not, for our marine resources. And to follow up on that, one of the activities that I'm involved in right now is this department is involved in updating our state wildlife action plans, which include strategic actions in regards to our marine resources. And looking, one of the things that I've noticed that's being done on the terrestrial end that we're not doing on the marine end at this point are vulnerability assessments, and looking at the vulnerability of the different things to climate change and ocean acidification. And I think that if we can take some of that, obviously there's a lot of research that needs to be done to underpin that type of assessment and that information we don't have. But I think that if we can start looking at that and starting to develop that we can start building more of a picture of what the implications are for not, beyond shellfish on our marine resources, and make that picture to a point where it's not going to go away. That in fact it is a very critical thing that we handle that. So I think it is upon the states to start, bringing this forward and starting to look at these different things as we develop the action plans that we need to do.
I just wanted to add a couple more comments to what Gretchen said. We have a lot of things going for us that we need to realize at this point in time. The National Science Foundation, as Gretchen pointed out, has a number of different ways to provide resources to do the coordination activities that we could be tapping into. NOAA has said the more you coordinate, the more you get things organized, the more rules support your regions. And they're looking for new innovative ways to do that, and have suggested in a number of ways that they're thinking about that they would relish input from outside the NOAA community to help with that coordination. So I think that we can start to see that the more we come together as a network and the more serious we are at coordinating at the 3 state level right now, and I would hope it be 4 states soon with bringing in Alaska, we would be in a better position to take advantage of these newer resources for coordination. That's one aspect of it. The second aspect of it is the scientists are your friend. And the scientists will begin to get a better understanding of the ecosystem responses. So right now we know a little bit about oysters and how they respond, or sea urchins how they respond. What we really want to know is how the community response that takes place, and how that affects the food chain, and how that affects things like salmon or sea otters or other species that really will make a difference in terms of bringing the public together as full awareness of this problem. I guarantee you when we make the connection for salmon, that's going to make a huge difference. And there is a potential connection with salmon and what the food they eat right now. But these kinds of ecosystem response studies are where the scientists have to make those connections and help create that relationship that you're looking for. In Puget Sound region, we've gone through and developed a food web model, for example, so that we know something about the potential secondary effects of acidification. So if it affects one organism, how does that migrate through the food chain? These are kinds of issues that we are looking down the road to say, how does that ecosystem respond as a whole, and what we might expect to see. So then we begin to say, when we get this model output that's so striking from Nicholas Gruber saying that we're going to have major effects in the next 30 or 40 years, how does that play out with respect to an ecosystem model that we should be running at the same time and seeing how those connections make it? That's the questions we got to be asking ourselves and driving the scientists to move in that direction. And by having a body that is fully dedicated to studying this problem and pushing the awareness of these issues at the state and local levels is the way we will move this along. And I assure you that the agencies will then cooperate with those entities that ensure success, because that's the way they operate now. They want to have buy-in with the state and local communities that really want to take this on seriously. So that's how you do it.
Always hard to follow, Dick Feely. Good words of wisdom, Dick. And I'm seeing that we're getting close to our coffee break, and I just wanted to, because I realized my name's on the agenda to help with this session, I realized I might be on tap to actually do something here. And I've heard 6 things. Imagine there's another one there. And I just think that we really need to make these things concrete as we go forward. So I'm going to make my attempt, Andrew, at wrapping this up. One is, Francis gave us a good challenge. Let's integrate the existing OA data streams. Let's declare that CCAN network. Let's start there. Let's make it real. And I think we need to establish a technical committee to decide, okay, on these existing data streams, what are the metadata? What are the QA requirements? So that we're actually starting from the folks who are generating that data, and can we get some consensus there? That seems like a real way to go forward instead of just, okay, what do we want out there in the thing? So if we've got the firepower to go forward, we could do that. A second thing is the Regional Association of IU's support, working within the 3 RAs to think about these data stream capabilities, a West Coast website, getting some visibility, once again, an unfunded mandate, but what can we do with existing resources to get it out there? A third thing is these best practices. We've got to make some headway on that. I know that there were some work groups from the first CCAN workshop. I think they got somewhere. I think they didn't finish, but let's either pick up on those or start again or something, but that's so critical. And then a fourth thing, which is kind of part of that, is this training, and we've been talking about that, the concept of workshops. I learned last night that there's some YouTube videos of Andrew giving some lectures, and I think, if we had a subcommittee or something that would really work on how can we bring these training visions to reality. We've got, Friday Harbor, Scripps, all sorts of wonderful places. What can we do? We've got the great USDA proposal, concepts that were pulled together, but we've got to pull this. And the fifth is getting the message out, and I think Ian, challenged us that it's not just shellfish. I think that there's a lot of ways, and we've heard about that in terms of getting that message out there, but putting some concerted effort into that. And that brings me to the sixth and final one, is really working to put CCAN in a very visible position. I mean, as we've been talking about, there's all these processes, and so if CCAN is out there in a much more visible position doing all of these things, I think, we can really start to make some inroads. So that's my thoughts on a wrap-up, with 2 minutes to spare for you, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Jen. Just to echo, I mean, certainly the training, the written documents, things like that, I think those are very important. My own simplistic view of this is looking at our NSF-supported reference material program, which has been running for many years now. It's grown enormously as the subject of ocean acidification has grown. To give you an example, in the last year, we sent out 8,600 bottles of seawater reference material. That's about 4.5 tons of seawater left Scripps by FedEx to go elsewhere. It went to about 100 labs in the US and about another 180 labs around the world over the last 2 years. Many of these labs are ones we were not sending reference materials to 3 years ago. As a result, my email stream is at some level an agony aunt column on problems with CO2 measurements. How to do them, how to make sense of it. Because the training, the documentation, the whole system lags the need. I think that as CCAN moves forward thinking what it can do, it should also recognize that its ability to lead the way for things that other regions, other people can take advantage of will at once improve the visibility that people have spoken for and also improve the attractiveness of actually asking for resources to achieve these things. And I hope we can come back to these discussions in our later talks to areas today. Just to remind you, those people that are interested in negotiating a shared ride to the airport should be talking with Diane, who has her little notepad by her, and will be waiting in the foyer to take down the information and make sense of it. Coffee is there. We'll meet again in about half an hour. Thank you.